Thank you so much for joining us today, Jake. How you doing?
Yeah, thanks, Josh, for having me. I'm doing pretty good. Obviously, lots of soccer going on, so trying to stay on top of it.
Yeah, there's way too much. You feel like international break, time to breathe. No, no, not really. so, and that's where I want to start. Obviously, we just finished this extended, important window for the U.S. men's national team heading into the World Cup later this year. For you, what it was kind of a weird window where you put a couple fellow World Cup opponents, and then you went into the CONCACAF Nations League, which gives you muddy fields in El Salvador and just a completely different context. What were the biggest lessons or things you feel like you learned about this team in this set of 4 games?
Yeah, so specifically talking about the U.S. men's national team's involvement and their debut in the Nations League this go around, obviously winning it its inaugural year last year. A couple of things. So one was obviously a desperate update for form up front. So you're talking about the center forwards, Jesus Ferreira, talking about Haji Wright getting a call for the first time in a long time. Obviously, based off of merit due to his goal scoring form in the club level, but really almost like a reintroduction for Haji at the international level. So that was certainly a question. Of course, getting a chance to see a healthy Weston McKennie once again after having a surgery, but also recovering from that foot issue with Juventus, and then also taking a look at right what's going on and is it Ethan Horvath? Is it Matt Turner? I mean, what's going on here? So to be included in the World Cup group. So that's what was on the ground. That's the first point I wanted to make was those three sub points of a major point, which was plugging in holes for a World Cup starting 11. But the second point I wanted to make was if you take a look at preparation, right? You take a look at the competition level that the national team was playing in the Nations League. You've got Grenada and you've got El Salvador. One was against a team who is 170th in the world according to FIFA rankings and doesn't really have much value in that regard to test the U.S. But it was a chance to see a lot of those players in what was really a tough environment, not necessarily the physical Austin, Texas environment. They're playing on home soil. It is technically their send off for the World Cup, but it's more about the fact that you have a lot of the group coming in after a very tough European cycle. Chris Lissick, Tyler Adams, a lot of these guys, Weston McKennie, a lot of these European-based guys who are coming off of a very tough season without much rest. And so it's tough to maybe incorporate them with the MLS-based players, the Jordan Morrises, the Aaron Longs, those guys who are obviously in the prime time of their MLS season. So taking a look at how those guys would mesh in a very awkward setup with, like I said, Grenada and El Salvador, and El Salvador playing on what looked like to be a 9 and under recreational park type of field. So it's good. You never want to lose, and the U.S. was able, and Jordan Morris was able to get the U.S. out of a bad situation in El Salvador. But that was something interesting to look at, which is the types of teams that they were playing, knowing that there's only going to be 2 more games in the September window before you actually have to begin World Cup preparations in November once you touch down in Qatar. So I think that's something that when you look at the September window, you really need to remind yourself about what happened, who stood out in this June window, and how could they make their case for a World Cup spot.
Were there players in particular that caught your attention? We saw primarily something close to what seems like it's going to be a starting 11. You saw the key players get a lot of minutes, but was there a player or two that you think really helped their stock to the extent that you can do that with so many spots in that starting 11? It feels like kind of solidified. Obviously, a couple are still up for grabs.
Yeah, I'm not sure about solidified, but I do think confirmation. And talking about those players who had some legit stock, but maybe hadn't proven themselves of a longer period. 2 players I think about is in the midfield. First, Luca De La Toure, someone who is obviously going to be moving this summer after Heracles was relegated in the Dutch division. That's someone who I think at the national level, you take a look at what happened in the January-February window with playing against El Salvador in World Cup qualifying. I think Luca de la Torre in that window had a very strong camp, had a very strong window, and going into this, obviously he did well in the March window as well, but obviously this time around, I think third time's a charm. I think that he's someone who has a legit chance, regardless of how potential injuries or not, how he stack up. He is proven himself to be a legit contributor to this national team into the midfield. A second is his partner in midfield, and Yunus Musa, someone who is pretty new, by compared to Weston McKennie and Tyler Adams, who we in the media have been able to watch them since they basically stepped onto the scene in early 2018. So I think he is someone who has the ability to be a attacking-minded player who has defensive capabilities. I think he is the hybrid between Tyler Adams and Weston McKennie. Weston being the guy who can really go forward and make stuff happen, and Tyler being that legit out-and-out midfielder at the number 6 role. So I like Yunus Musa. He is technically probably best of that bunch. Just the way he moves with the ball, and to couple that with his physicality is impressive. I think that Jesus Ferreira had something to say about his role in the national team and this question going into the September window about who is the starting number 9 for this team. And lastly, I honestly think that Aaron Long has the chance, without Miles Robinson due to his Achilles, he has something to say about partnering with Walker Zimmerman in central defense.
And I wanted to mention them, and obviously they were sort of the two headlines in terms of uncertainty, very top number 9 position, and the back goalkeeping. Starting with Ferreira and the number 9. At one point in this window, it kind of looked like this might be slipping away from him because he had some opportunities he didn't take, and then all of a sudden he scores 4 goals, and we're having a different conversation again because Greg Berhalter gave him a third chance and he took full advantage of it. Do you feel like going into these 2 games in September, going into the final look at this team before the World Cup, he is the guy sort of in the pole position for that number 9 spot, or do you think this is still wide open and club form? Greg Berhalter's talked about this, that whoever's scoring goals is going to get an opportunity. Do you feel like this is a very open field, or do you feel like it's Ferreira's to lose at this point?
No, it's definitely an open field. It's still an open field, obviously, with a tough relegation battle with Augsburg. Pep is obviously still in that situation, and in that consideration pool, you can't really rule out what you're going to get from Jordan Pefok, although I know and it seems that he's a little bit down the pecking order, especially given Ferreira's form right now. And if Jesus continues to score throughout the MLS season into the end of the calendar year, inching towards the World Cup, it really helps his chances. And so, and then quite honestly, it's something that I haven't personally ruled out is like, let's consider Tim Weah as a central forward option, albeit he is a very good winger. He's shown against likes of Costa Rica and Jamaica in qualifying that he is someone who can offer you goals and create chances off the right wing. But given how the national team is and the status in center forward, I think he is someone who you have to consider for that role too.
And then the goalkeeper situation, and specifically, I guess 2 parts. One, if you're Greg Berhalter, World Cup starts tomorrow, who are you putting in net? And 2, what is your concern level with what it looks like is going to be a situation where, like for this sort of second half of World Cup qualifying, the 3 guys who have played the primary role likely are going to start the season as backups for their European teams. Sean Johnson has obviously had a really good performance and is playing well for NYCFC. So he looks like he might be the only one of these 4 guys we're talking about that's actually going to be playing consistent minutes. Where is your concern level on that part of it? And then also, if who's your number 1 right now?
Yeah, if I'm Greg Berhalter, it's going to be Matt Turner. And I have gone from Zach Steffen to Matt Turner, but I didn't like what I saw from Zach in the March window. I thought he had a couple of mistakes, a couple of close ones, notably that one very close save where he did basically save. He technically saved the ball against Chucky Lozano. I believe that was the first half of that game at Azteca, and it was the crowd with a penalty. It seemed that their feet got caught up, with each other during that close save. But just the sharpness, I have a question about Zach and where he fits in terms of form, like you mentioned, because he's not going to be playing at Man City, and so a loan move would be very ideal to start window in summer window. I mean, and so it's not like Matt Turner is going to be playing much at Arsenal either, and it's kind of weird how Matt, with the way things ended with New England over the weekend, I'm very curious to see where his head is at and what he plans to do in fall with Arsenal. So those are two guys who I think Zach's got to get a loan move. But I still think that if I'm Greg Berhalter right now, I'm going to pick Matt Turner. And yes, very concerning when it comes to the fact that only Sean Johnson in that three-person group is probably going to be the only person playing. And Ethan Horvath, it's unfortunate he looks to be on the outside looking in. But yeah, in terms of form, Sean Johnson will likely be the best in form because he's playing every game for NYCFC.
And then finally, you mentioned the window. We now know who these opponents are going to be in these final two tune-up games in Europe. What do you want to see? Is there something you feel like Greg Berhalter can really figure out in these two games that are still, a little bit before he's making decisions about who he's going to throw out there against Wales in the end of November? But what are you kind of hoping to see? What do you think the team can get out of these final two games against quality opposition?
Yeah, quality oppositions, notably, obviously Saudi Arabia, although a lot of folks are trying to equate them to playing style-wise, stylistically speaking, trying to compare them to Iran. But I do have more of an eye for the U.S. going up against Japan a couple of days before that. So I think it's quality that I'm looking for, especially up front. The likes of, as I would expect Ricardo Pepi to be in that, more of a European-based team. Pepi coming back in. I think, looking at players like Matt Turner, getting some minutes in with the national team, and obviously Zach Steffen as well. Taking a look at, is Haji Wright going to get another chance or not? Is Greg Berhalter was very critical of him after the El Salvador game, saying that he didn't take advantage of his chance, and it was disappointing to him the way he played, which I thought personally was kind of harsh, given. And I know the conditions is a low-hanging fruit here, but the chances that they, or the lack thereof that they created in the first half against El Salvador, I don't think Haji is to be blamed for that. However, he did have a couple opportunities where he shot one over the bar, and that's that on that. But I think there's going to be those kind of proof battles going on, not necessarily between player and player, but between player and coach, trying to prove to Greg Berhalter that they belong in the discussion for who is going to be on this roster come November.
And obviously we've had plenty of domestic news, MLS related, World Cup related as well. I want to get to the World Cup in a second, but real quick, MLS broadcast moving to Apple TV starting next year. This is very different than the MLS broadcast setup as we know. What are your thoughts? Kind of what are you hearing? How are people reacting to this idea that it's all there and it's all behind a paywall and it's Apple TV and you're done with local broadcasts and this is just a very different approach MLS is taking?
Yeah, I think you said it in your question there that the biggest public outcry right now is the ridding of local broadcasts, and the fact that although it's very clear, and anyone who's watched enough MLS can say that not every MLS broadcast on the local level is equal. I think there's a lot of broadcasts who are a little more sharp. You take a look at Bally Sports South with Atlanta. I think Nashville has a really good broadcast. house with Tony Husband and Jimmy Watson as their duo. I think that if you go out west, I think there's a pretty good broadcast with out there in Denver with Altitude Sports with Connor Cape and a lot of those guys. And Minnesota is another good one that I think is pretty decent. And there's going to be some analysts who are, basically in and around, right? Charlie Davis does stuff with Paramount Plus, but he's with the New England Revolution broadcast team. If you've got Max Bretos, you've got Adrian Healy, some of these guys who were once on the network side but have gone into the club sides. I mean, with Adrian Healy doing great things in Austin, I think it's tough, with Mike LaHood there as well. I forgot to mention as an analyst, it's tough because there's a lot of talent that you got to ask what's going to happen with a lot of that talent going into this new app. Another thing is we don't know the prices right now. We don't know what the subscription fees will be. Don't know how this will happen and experience what the experience will be in real time. Having to go into Apple TV, then to go within Apple TV to get to the MLS app. There's a lot of things going on, but I want to say one strong thing I think to help MLS is they're centralizing production. So they're going to have the entire, front of house, back of house, all under the MLS team, and I think that's going to be something that gives them a lot more strength, a lot more consistency. And I love the idea of a whip around show. I mean, take a look at not just the what's going on in the soccer world with the Golazo show, obviously with Champions League and Europa League, but take a look at NFL Red Zone. I think that's the best comparison in American sports, and I think the really the only comparison at this level. The only difference is that this won't be on linear television. You can't subscribe on Spectrum or Comcast or DirecTV, whatever you have. You can't go through that to find a MLS network like you have with NFL Network. You have to essentially have a smart TV or a tablet or some sort of smart device that will get you there. So, but the reality is when you take a look at that and you take a look at the numbers, like just going back to the Nashville SC Sporting Kansas City game on Juneteenth, 88,000 off cable. And there's a bit of inconsistency because over 400,000 watched LA Galaxy. I believe that was that Portland or Seattle?
Portland, yeah.
It was Portland on ESPN and ESPN Deportes. Those two numbers combined were over 400,000. So there's some inconsistency with the cable numbers. So I don't blame MLS going this route, making everything central, not just the production itself, but also subscribers and bringing in content around that, not just on game days. Gary Stevenson, deputy commissioner for MLS, said that there will be eventually content that's pushed through Apple News, that's pushed through other other Apple outlets, in which fans can engage with that content on a regular, daily basis. And a player from Colombia, let's say he's a youth national team or a young Colombian national team player who's playing in Europe or playing in South America, and he signs, let's say, for Columbus Crew. Now you've got pretty much his entire following from Colombia and his team potentially in Europe or in South America going to your site, going to your app, going to your content to figure out what is Columbus Crew, trying to familiarize themselves with his new digs. And I think from MLS and Apple standpoint, that's what you want.
And then the other big news we've had here, World Cup 2026 bids. You were obviously very closely covering all of the efforts in Nashville. Generally, how surprised were you about the cities that actually did get the World Cup, get to be host sites? Share your overall thoughts there. And then on the Nashville side specifically, do you feel like there's something Nashville could have done differently, better? I know you broke this down and sort of talked about the reasons why Nashville ended up not getting a bid, but do you feel like there's something that the city should have done, or it just kind of ended up in this unfortunate situation where you had all of these huge metropolitan areas on the the coast that ended up getting it there and kind of left the Midwest scrambling for a spot or two potentially?
First off, DC/Baltimore being snubbed in lieu for and in preference for Boston is probably the biggest surprise in general. The fact that there are going to be thousands of people having to drive to Foxborough, Massachusetts, and Gillette Stadium to go watch some of the best players in the world play in a World Cup, as opposed to going to, historically speaking, and the efforts and the culture and the pedigree that has been Washington, D.C. and Baltimore is pretty sad when you take a look at the landscape and really the attention. D.C. has led, numbers-wise, has led the United States in viewers watching the English Premier League on NBC. So to see that market completely be left out of the 2026 World Cup is the biggest surprise. Going to the Nashville side, I think it's not so much a surprise. When you take a look at the fact that in that central region, the Kansas City had the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, and that entire group, as well as local government being on board with this bid. You do not see that at Nashville. There's not a Roman Yossi, there's not a Pekka Rinne, a Derrick Henry, a Ryan Tannehill. There's not even a Taylor Lewan, right? There's no one from Broadway or country music, R&B, hip hop that is based or is rooted in Nashville that jumped on this marketing wise. And so the fact that Nashville bid was really very much a workman's bid, and I'll get to the technical side in a moment, but the marketing side, you really think that, I think that was a big mistake to not have those trying to garner buzz and to garner interest and popularity with the community based off of the influencers, the grassroots influencers of the city. That's going to be a mistake that will be haunting Nashville and its committee members as we inch closer and closer to the World Cup. But on the technical side, it was detrimental. And, considering what Nashville did in terms of revealing plans for a new closed air stadium going in 2026, after FIFA had visited Nashville September of last year, the plans didn't come until late February this year. And so I think that disrupted the familiarity and the confidence that FIFA had in Nissan Stadium. And the fact that talking with the Titans and with those from the committee told me that FIFA told the committee that essentially Nissan Stadium is the best or one of the best NFL stadiums built for FIFA soccer, FIFA sanctioned soccer events. And so, yes, they would have had to knock out all four corners of the stadium, the seats and everything. They would have had to have overhauls and VIP and hospitality areas. And then, of course, and potentially would have had to build almost 2,000 covered media seats, not just written media, but audio and radio and broadcast media as well. That is something that, really could have been done. And, we could potentially be looking at Nashville having a bit. And so I think those two things really hurt Nashville in terms of going up against the Kansas Cities of the world.